involved in this project. A little bit about who's involved in this project besides our team, which is Ford Pinellas. We are also working hand in glove with our folks over at Pinellas County Economic Development, our folks at the Pinellas County Housing and Community Development, as well as our primary consultant on this work, which is Renaissance Planning, and their subconsultant, SB Friedman. Next slide. So just to get things started in terms of the interactive nature of this and to make sure all our polling is working, we do have a bit of an icebreaker for you. If you could tune into this and just fill this out so we can ensure all that polling processes are working, that'd be greatly appreciated.
Yep. So, hi, my name is Amanda Chornaby. I'm with Renaissance Planning, so providing the tech support for today. So if you guys want to take out your phone or if you want to open a web browser, so if you're using your phone, you can text the phone number 22333 and then the phrase True Train 007, no spaces. And if you're using your browser, pollev.com/truetrain007, and you'll get a prompt that says, I believe, welcome to Caroline Dwyer's poll, something along those lines, which is one of my coworkers. And then if you just text your answer, and there we go, we got it rolling. So this is just a fun icebreaker, testing again our polling. We'll have one additional poll question, and later when we do the additional poll, you won't have to retype in this number. You can just provide your responses because you'll already be logged in. So if anybody's having issues, just let me know. I think we can all agree B is the winner. So, all right. So with that, it looks like you guys are, you got the poll EV working. So we'll move on. But if we get to later in the presentation, if we get to the poll and you're having issues again, just let me know.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Amanda. All right, so just a little bit about who we are here at Ford Pinellas. We are a policymaking and planning agency that consists of a merger between the Pinellas Planning Council, which helps to steer growth and redevelopment countywide through the implementation and administration of our countywide plan, as well as our Pinellas County Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, which helps to identify transportation needs throughout Pinellas County and then help secure funding for those transportation needs via our Transportation Improvement Program, the Long Range Transportation Plan, and a number of other special projects transportation planning that we have going on throughout the agency. Next slide. So now I want to kind of transition a bit to why we are updating the Target Employment and Industrial Land Study. Next slide. But I think in order for us to do that, I want to provide a little bit of the vision and history as to what's led us here to this moment. And so Pinellas County is commonly what we refer to in the planning world as a redeveloping county, which essentially means that we have very limited vacant land for new development countywide. And those vacant lands that we do have available, specifically those that we have designated for target employment or industrial uses, are vital components to the attraction and retainment of target employment countywide. However, given the fact that they are vacant lands, there has been a great deal of historic pressure put on these lands to convert to other uses, namely commercial and residential uses that, at least from a market standpoint, tend to have a quicker return on investment. Next slide. And this is nothing new. This is in fact what led to the original Target Employment and Industrial Land Study of 2008, which found that from about 2003 to 2006, roughly 264 acres of land that had been designated for industrial or target employment uses was converted to other designations, again, primarily within that residential and commercial category. And that it was also found that in order for Pinellas County to continue to remain economically vibrant and vital, that about 8,000 acres was needed to accommodate roughly 182,000 new jobs by 2025. However, only about 4,000 acres of vacant land was available at that time to accommodate those new target employers. And that's what led us at Ford Pinellas since that time frame to really have a staunch preservationist policy when it comes to industrial land. Next slide. And what we mean by a more preservation-based policy or preservationist policy is that we tend to not allow those industrial and target employment uses to convert to other uses, barring special exceptions. And when we do evaluate the potential for a employment or industrial land property to convert to another use, we take a look at several balancing criteria that are outlined within our countywide plan relating to job density, characteristics of the site, characteristics of the surrounding area, infrastructure that's present on the site, and consistency with other planning efforts. Next slide. And so throughout this study, we're going to be making reference to target employment centers and target employment. And what we really mean by that are these lands that you see highlighted in purple on the right-hand side of your screen on that map. These were established after the 2008 Target Employment Industrial Land Study to ensure that we are preserving those properties for those target employment needs. And when we talk about target employment specifically, we're specifically making reference to those employers and industries that pay above average wages and are producing goods and services that are bringing revenue into Pinellas County. And those target employment centers are really the areas that are either now developed or appropriate for development for specifically target employment uses in a concentrated and cohesive pattern. And those lands that are represented there on the right-hand side of your screen make up about 13,000 acres of designated target employment land, which is about roughly 7% of the county's land area. Next slide. And so why are we here today and why are we looking to update the Target Employment Industrial Land Study? First and foremost, in 2020, some of you may be aware, Governor DeSantis approved what's called House Bill 1339, which allows for the development of any residential property on industrial land as long as it is deemed to be 100% affordable housing. However, in addition to this, back in 2021, Senate Bill 962 and 981 and House Bill 981 were also passed and are currently awaiting signature from the governor, which would serve as an expansion to House Bill 1339 and would allow for any residential development to be built on industrial land, regardless of countywide planning policy, as long as at least 10% of those planned units were for affordable housing purposes. In addition to this, we have the Penny for Pinellas Affordable Housing Program, which has unintentionally placed some additional pressures on these vacant lands to convert for affordable housing uses, again, to meet those target needs. And also, we understand that target employer needs have changed since 2008, since the last study was commissioned. So we're kind of at a bit of a crossroads here where we feel like it's almost as if target employment and affordable housing issues are sort of being penned against one another, and we don't want that to be the case. And we certainly want to get ahead of that moving forward. And so ultimately, we believe it's time to update the TEILS study. Next slide. And so just some of the high level objectives we hope to accomplish, and this isn't an exhaustive list by any means, but we do want to identify the need for employment and industrial lands by our target employers. Perhaps there's land that we currently are preserving or have designated for target employment use that's really no longer viable for those uses. And conversely, there may be lands that we're not paying attention to or not looking at that should be utilized for those target employment uses. We also want to identify changes to the countywide plan that could help support and incentivize the location, expansion, and retainment of key target employers throughout Pinellas County. And also, we want to be sure that we evaluate the effectiveness of our existing preservation-based policies that we've had since 2008, kind of embedded within the countywide plan. Next slide. And so again, before I hand it over to our folks at Renaissance, I'd be remiss not to provide some examples of what specifically I mean by target employers that utilize industrial lands, because typically when we talk about target employment or industrial lands, it might conjure up in our heads this image of these bellowing smokestacks and these very kind of archaic views of what industry looks like today. And really what we're talking about is we're talking about clean target employers that pay high wage jobs, such as Core RX that you see there on the left, such as Valpak, next slide, as well as Jabil, Lockheed Martin, next slide. And finally, this is just an example that I thought was really good. This is actually a hydraulics manufacturing company that's located behind the Carrabba's off State Road 60, just across from the Clearwater Mall. You pass by that building, you would probably have no idea that there was high-end manufacturing going on there. So again, these are just kind of there so that when we're talking about industrial lands or target employment, we're really trying to get rid of those notions that it's just these, bellowing smokestacks and what have you. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Kate from Renaissance, our primary consultant on this work. And thank you all again for being here today.
Thanks, Jared, and good afternoon, everyone. Again, Kate Angie with Renaissance Planning, and also my team members with me today, Mike Callahan, Amanda Tornaby, and Autumn Young. We also have our friends at SB Freeman who will introduce themselves in a moment. But I'd first like to really welcome, as Whit did, all of you as the advisory committee. We really wanted to make sure for this study that we were getting kind of a range of perspectives, because obviously those of us that work within the public sector or for the public sector kind of have a view of things through the policy lens, our elected officials, but we also really wanted to hear from the private sector. So we've tried to invite some of you that represent these very businesses that we'll be talking about. And of course, we want a range of expertise from the planning all the way to the kind of legal aspects of all of this. But what we want from you today, and the reason we're having this meet and greet, is to make sure that as we work through this study and the analysis that we're doing, that we're answering the questions that you all want answered. And ultimately, when we come out of this study with recommendations, that this group of folks is kind of bought into those recommendations in terms of any policy changes that may be needed. Next slide. So real quick, if you guys could take a moment to just type into the chat your name and kind of who you're representing in terms of a business or a public agency and your role in that. And if I could just ask for a few folks to maybe step up and given the introduction and maybe what you've known or heard about the study, what do you hope that we will come out of this study in terms of goals or specifics that you would like to see the study achieve? And if I could just ask folks to maybe raise their hand and share with us maybe some of your concerns or things that you'd like to see the study make sure that we accomplish. And I know it's hard. If we were in person, I could just like eyeball all of you and get you to raise your hand. Mr. Pergolesi, am I saying that right? Oh, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I don't know if I'm the only one from the private sector here, but I do consulting for land developers, and I've run into the TEILS study and issues with that in the past. I mean, I would like to find out if this update is going to look at how we're utilizing our current industrial land and are we using it to the fullest potential? Because I know a lot of it is underutilized and not near the floor area ratios it could be at. And second, you're going to be looking to balance affordable housing, residential, or possibly mixed use projects on industrial lands. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Any other? Well, let me answer your first question. Yes, we are absolutely looking at not just the kind of existing uses, but partly we're asking existing employers about the use of their land and the space needs that will go on with, expansion needs or things of that nature. So we will be hitting on the points that you raised for sure.
Okay. Follow up?
Sure.
Will you be expanding the definition of target employment to include more healthcare employment uses?
I think that's certainly within the realm of what this project will explore. I think, again, what we're trying to understand are the needs. And I think you're going to see a little bit more of the profile of what the target employment clusters are in the county and kind of why. So part of this will absolutely expand maybe some of those definitions.
Thank you.
Any other comments or thoughts about what we should be looking at for this project?
And I'll just add, if you're having issues raising your hand or using that, just feel free to drop your question in the chat as well.
I see a hand up by Patricia McNeese.
Yeah, this is Pat McNeese up at Tarpon. I'm I'm assuming, I don't know the status of the recent legislation that was passed, whether the governor signed a bill on the affordable housing infill in any, zoning. I would, if that is signed and it goes through, I would like to see if you all would be putting an analysis or something in of how you see that playing out. As we know, a lot of that stuff legislation that's passed is poorly worded. So I don't know how it's going to be implemented. So that, or whether you guys think anybody will even use it. And then the other thing is just, I'm sure you'll be looking at the jurisdictions from the viewpoint maybe of the developer and of each of the cities. We have stuff north of Van Cloat that is in the city and not in the city. Whether stuff could be packaged or purchased or whatever developers want to do, how the jurisdictional pattern is affecting that. So that's just two things I think of offhand.
Yeah, those are great comments. Two quick things. First of all, I think, yeah, Linda made a point in the chat that no, the new legislation has not yet been signed by the governor, but this project absolutely is anticipating that it probably will be signed. And so one of the things we're going to be looking at is kind of the areas of maybe greatest risk for conversion, just based on existing development trends and attractiveness of lands in and around those employment areas that are maybe going to be looked at for housing. What we do know is that especially those that are trying to build affordable housing, they're looking for some of the cheapest land, maybe not the best location always, but certainly something that they can build on. And then in terms of how to think about your lands that might be adjacent to your jurisdictions, yes, we're going to look at kind of both within the cities and on county lands, how do we best preserve and kind of keep those lands aggregated, if you will, and you're going to hear a little bit more about why that's so important in terms of the clusters of these uses throughout the county. Any other questions or comments just in terms of what we want to get out of this study or what we should be looking at?
Okay, Gary Crooms has his hand up.
Oh, thank you.
Cliff Mers as well.
Mr. Grooms.
The question about what I would hope this would achieve, I'm actually kind of a target employer. I'm on the Alum and CRA Advisory Board, and my shop is located in Joe's Creek Industrial Park. And I think there's been a big push towards trying to do what we can to create jobs. And as an employer and a manufacturing employer, my problem is quite the opposite. It's a complete lack of employees. And so I think we're very misguided to be pushing to try and create jobs when everybody I know, especially manufacturing, can't find employees. So in the last 10 years, I have never once not at least offered a job or hired somebody who was qualified. But I could hire 10 people tomorrow, but I can't get them. And I think anything that we're pushing to try and make it worse for sake of discussion, to take a very poor labor pool and create higher competition is very misguided.
Excellent point. We do have workforce development as part of our kind of stakeholder group here so that we can get some of that represented in terms of those labor dynamics and how is the county addressing kind of the creation of the talent pool that we can't, as you said, just have one side of that coin. So thank you for that comment. I think there was one other hand raised. Sorry, Mike, I'm only seeing a couple of people on the screen right now.
Yeah, there was another hand raised, but he is either dropped off or put his hand down. I'm trying to scroll through and see.
I'm not sure.
Oh, Cliff Mers. Yeah, would you still like to go ahead? he might be frozen.
Okay, well, we'll have a
So
few
I don't know
minutes.
if I'm,
There you go.
okay. I'm off-site in Monroe County right now with some poor internet connections, so it's cutting in and out. So I only heard a little bit about the previous comment, and I think it's important that we not only identify and look at the 10 or 12 employment types that were discussed that were specific to Pinellas County, but I also think it's important that we look at the skill sets necessary for those types of positions and any types of positions that we think are necessary, and provide a listing of necessary skills that some of the educational areas around can maybe provide. So as the issue is to find, well-trained people, there are efforts out there to train people, but I think this is a very unique opportunity to find out the skill sets necessary and then evaluate to see whether we're training people properly or we have that amount.
You froze up on us there, but I think we got the gist of it. Just emphasizing that we can't just look at the demand side, but we have to look at the supply of the workers, and can we actually fill these jobs if we're going to start to continue to have targets for employment growth in the county. Okay, well, in the interest of time, let's go ahead and keep going. And if anybody has any additional thoughts after we get through this, there'll be time at the end to share. But again, just for today, this was called a meet and greet so that you guys could get exposure to, again, what this project is meant to study and look at, but we really want to also hear your concerns and make sure that we're on point in terms of the analysis we're doing, the questions we're asking. But we also want you all to get the word out about the study. So if there's some stakeholder or there's an existing business owner that we've not got on our radar, you guys can tell us who they are and make sure we have a conversation. We're going to have additional workshops, and we'll talk about those at the end, but we will be coming and talking to you in person. I know all of us appreciate that when we can have some face-to-face time. So that's a little further down the road. Next slide. So I think big picture, when we're talking about employment in Pinellas County and kind of the target industries, Amanda, I'm not seeing the slide advance, sorry. There we go. As Jared kind of and Whit both introduced, the county continues to grow. So in spite of the fact that there's not a lot of vacant land or greenfield land to develop on, growth is happening. And even though there's not a lot of skyscrapers countywide, you all have some of the highest population density already in Florida. So again, back to, as we accommodate new growth in the county, it's got to be through redevelopment and maybe a better utilization of existing lands. But what that's creating is this real competition between jobs and housing, and it's really hitting a flashpoint. Hence the reason there's some activity at the legislature to try to deal with the issues. So the other thing we want to make sure of is that, Pinellas currently has a fair share of good industrial and other jobs, and we want to keep the competitive position in the region because we are having to compete with other counties around the area. Next slide. So if we look at kind of the share of Pinellas County's jobs for the rest of the region, you can get a sampling here. You all are capturing about 30%. And the goal is to at least keep that number and not see it decline and continue to be competitive over time. And the biggest thing that we're hearing is, in addition to real strong labor shortages, is just how to retain the existing employees you have. One of the things we've already heard about is that oftentimes when you're trying to recruit, it's hard to recruit folks to live here because we have a high housing cost. So those are the sorts of things we want to explore with this study. Next slide. If you look at the breakdown today, one of the things that's really interesting is about 50% of the jobs are either in that industrial or office category. And when we talk about industrial, as Jared showed, That's everything from high-tech manufacturing to, you know, the bread maker, if you will, or jobs like that. And about 35% of the industrial is in manufacturing, which is pretty significant for the county. So again, how do you retain that? How do we make sure that we can kind of keep this mix in the county as you all move forward? Next slide. So the big questions that we're going to answer are, again, what are the target industries, kind of making sure we're all clear on what those are, and what are the things that need to be done differently to continue to attract and retain those existing employees. We want to understand through kind of a demand and supply analysis, you know, do we have enough existing lands and existing employers and kind of those things? And what are the needs of those employers in terms of space? And it's not just your space needs, but are there location preferences? You know, some jobs and some employers really want to be located in a place where their employees can walk to other destinations. Others, that doesn't matter so much. They need good access with highways and you know, truck traffic and those sorts of things. We want to understand if there are any existing limiting factors to how folks are using their land today, be it policy or other constraints. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we really want to know where are the areas that are most at risk for conversion, particularly to housing. Next slide. So our study is going to look kind of in three big buckets. We are doing what we're calling the target industry analysis, and really making sure that we're, you know, focused on the right jobs that make sense for Pinellas County over the long term, and then understanding the demand in the future. One of the things that we launched on Monday is a target employer survey, and that's asking the existing employers in the county kind of what are your needs, what are your constraints, what are those issues with attracting and retaining the labor force. We're also going to look and do a little kind of look back to say what's been going on in the county in terms of those specific lands that have turned or converting. What are those dynamics so that we can do some future forecasting in terms of risk areas. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin with SB Freeman.
Thanks, Kate. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Caitlin Johnson. I'm with SB Freedman Development Advisors. I'm joined on the call by my colleagues, Jeff Dickinson and Alana Kaminer. For those of you who are not as familiar, SB Freedman is a real estate and economic development advisory firm. We're based in Chicago, but we've had the opportunity to work with Forward Pinellas, Pinellas County, and communities throughout the Tampa Bay region for the last 5+ years, helping on planning projects like the Gateway Master Plan, as well as various policy initiatives like the Penny for Pinellas or the County CRA policy. So I guess to just dive right in, as Kate was just mentioning, the first of our analytical tasks was a target industry analysis to identify what jobs are important to preserve and grow in Pinellas County. Before we dive into the data, I wanted to just take a quick step back and talk about our analysis framework a bit. I'm sure many of you have heard of target industries mentioned before, but what we mean when we're talking about target industries is essentially economic clusters, which are regional concentrations of related industries. Regional economies are made up of two types of economic clusters, each with different patterns of geographic presence and different competitive dynamics. The first of these types of clusters is a traded cluster or a primary job cluster. And the second type of cluster is a local cluster, which consists of industries that really serve the local market. And as Jared mentioned, we're really focused on the first type of cluster, the traded cluster, the related industries that export products outside of the region and that typically provide higher wages. So when we're talking about target industries or target industry economic development strategies, we are essentially talking about a cluster strategy and focusing on attracting and retaining target industries is important for various reasons. First, because traded clusters typically do pay higher wages. Therefore, attracting target industries creates more and higher wage job opportunities. Additionally, because clusters are groups of related industries, there are competitive advantages that stem from shared industry knowledge, shared jobs and skills, technologies, and other effects that really help spur innovation in the economy. And then finally, this approach targets economic development efforts that build on the existing industries and assets already present in the county and region. This approach is not new for Pinellas County or even the region. Pinellas County Economic Development has historically used this cluster-based strategy to really attract and retain target industries in the county. So next slide, please. So what are those target industries? SB Friedman conducted detailed analyses of employment and wage data to identify the target industries based on a number of factors like the number of jobs produced, average wages, each sector's contribution to gross regional product or GRP, as well as looking at how specialized each cluster is in the region compared to the larger region or the county or the country. Based on this, 7 economic clusters were identified as target industries for Pinellas County, many of which were confirmed as target industries from previous studies. So these are shown on the screen, and they are business services, financial services, information technology, medical technology and life science, microelectronics, aviation, aerospace and defense, and then marketing, design, and publishing. A core part of our analysis was understanding why industrial and other jobs in target industries are critical to attract and retain, and to really understand what's at risk if the county loses these jobs. So we looked at this from 3 perspectives. First is an economic impact perspective, as well as employment and payroll. And if we go to the next slide, we can start looking through these. But first, I guess before we dive into each of these impacts, I want to pause and pose a question to you all about what do you think are the top 3 target industries in Pinellas County in terms of economic impact, particularly here as measured by gross regional product or the market value of all of the goods and services provided in each of these clusters. So I'll let Amanda kind of guide you through that polling.
Yeah, so if you were able to submit your answers earlier to the poll, you should be already logged in, and then you can submit up to 3 answers. So you would select like A, and then you could send in another 2 after that. And then so if you weren't able to log in, the instructions are at the top again. So text 22333 and then True Train 007. And we did have a question in the chat, Caitlin, of do medical offices and hospitals fall into the medical technology category?
For the purposes of this analysis, medical offices and hospitals do not fall into the med tech category. That's primarily more focused on the manufacturing and R&D associated with medical technology. Hospitals and healthcare typically fall under a local close cluster or a secondary job type because those services are primarily provided to the local community.
Jeff, you're coming
in.
in really, you're not coming in clear. Sorry, Jeff. Maybe you could restate that.
Sure, I just, can you hear me now?
Yep, now you sound good.
Something about my Zoom is always screwed up. If you're the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and people fly on 747s to get heart surgery, that would be a target industry medical situation, but 99% of the medical facilities in the country serve the folks who live there. And so it's not really a source of economic growth. It's an important service, but it doesn't grow your economy. It just serves the folks who live there.
All right, it looks like answers have stopped rolling in, so I'll go ahead and lock this poll. But before we move on, so it looks like aviation, aerospace, defense, and medical technologies, life sciences were tied in first, and then information technology was right after that, but very close.
Thanks everyone for providing answers or guesses to that question. So let's see how your answers compare. Do you want to go to the next slide, please? So what we see is that business services, financial services, and information technology are the top 3 target industries in terms of gross regional product in Pinellas County. Overall, these target industries account for about 17 billion in market value in the county, and it accounts for about a third of total GRP. Additionally, not only do these 7 target industries significantly contribute to the county's overall GRP, but it is also a growing proportion of it. So in the chart, the lighter shade on the bar indicates the growth in GRP post Great Recession since 2012. So as you can see on this, since 2012, GRP of target industries has grown significantly. It's about 38% growth overall for these 7 sector or clusters compared to 32% for local or secondary industries. Want to go to the next slide, please? So the next impact that we looked at was employment. As target industries provide important employment opportunities, target industries account for a growing share of the county's primary cluster employment base. So as you can see on these charts, compared to 2012, target industries account for a greater proportion of those primary jobs, growing from 61.9% to 63.3% of jobs. During this period, target industry employment grew by roughly 20% compared to other primary clusters, which grew by only about 18%. So these industries are important to attract and retain in order to provide more employment opportunities for residents in the county. And then on the next slide, the third perspective that we looked at was wages or payroll. As I briefly mentioned, one variable that we considered when identifying target industries was wages. On average, jobs in target industries earn an average of $86,000 and have significantly higher wages than the other primary clusters, as well as compared to the living wage required to support 2 working adults with 2 children. And that living wage estimate comes from the MIT living wage calculator. Comparison to the living wage is particularly important because this is the threshold that's required for a household to cover the everyday costs of living, accounting for housing and transportation and food. It's the amount needed to really meet minimum standards of living. So jobs that exceed the living wage are key to growing the county's economy and quality of life. And these higher paying jobs lead to more disposable income to spend on supporting our secondary industries like retail and hospitality, which is just another reason why it is just so important to continue to attract and retain these target industry jobs. Next slide, please. So when we talk about attracting and retaining target industries, we're simultaneously talking about real estate and either attracting new real estate development or preserving existing office and industrial space. And we're thinking about the land required to support that development. Of course, population and employment growth are 2 of the biggest determinants of overall economic growth, but the various location and transportation-based factors also influence attraction strategies. So we're thinking about things like access to labor force and supply chains. So while we are conducting a more detailed real estate market analysis, as part of this first phase of work, we also looked at the spatial distribution of these target industry businesses in the county to start to really understand some of these spatial dynamics. So on this slide, what you're seeing is the spatial distribution of 2 of the industrial focused target industries. So on the left side here, you see the aviation, aerospace, and defense businesses, and then the right shows the microelectronics businesses. And what we see from the data is really the importance of these target employment centers that were introduced earlier in the meeting. Particularly here in the gateway area in the middle of the county, where there are large industrial areas that can support those larger industrial facilities. And this isn't too surprising to us, as industrial businesses do typically locate where there are clusters of similar firms and where there's access to labor force and regional transportation networks. Next slide, please. So now on this slide, what we're showing is the spatial distribution of 2 of the more office-oriented target industries. So we have business services on the left and financial services on the right. While there is certainly a more dispersed pattern here, there are a couple of spatial dynamics that have emerged from this data. First, we do see that the larger businesses that employ more than 250 people have typically located in target employment centers, particularly in the gateway in the area around Carillon, illustrating really the importance of these target employment centers for these large employers. Additionally, we see clusters in activity centers like downtown St. Pete and Clearwater, where there's a more walkable environment, as well as along major corridors with easy access to customers. Again, as we dig deeper into the office and industrial market assessments, we'll continue to uncover more of these spatial dynamics to help inform the larger analysis. And with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Renaissance to talk through some of their preliminary land use analyses.
Thanks, Caitlin. So again, we're just giving you a taste of the work that we've started to do, but there's still more to dig into. But just real quick, what has actually been some of the conversion or land lost in the last 10 years. And we've seen a decrease in about 750 acres. And what you can see on the map over to the right, it's a little hard to see, but basically within the target employment centers, all of the land that's converted is what's showing up in red. So it's gone from an industrial to another use. The only good news is that most of those uses are also non-residential. So in theory, we could presume that means they're still job producing, but we don't know that yet. But this is the kind of analysis that we're going to do, is essentially to look at both the spatial distribution of conversions that have already happened, but we're also going to try to predict where might those conversions be most at risk moving forward. Because at the end of the day, we want to be able to make recommendations to, again, make sure that if there is opportunity to see some of these lands redevelop and infill, are there some areas, because there's high demand for housing nearby, that could actually become mixed use? And where are there areas where we absolutely must kind of retain it as a single use district? Those are the sorts of things we're going to be exploring. Next slide. So with that, we're going to open it back up to kind of get some quick reactions from you all. And I guess I'll start with kind of the first set of questions. Did anything that we presented in terms of the target industries, the location of those, and kind of some of the dynamics within the county, if you could raise your hand and kind of give us some preliminary feedback, and let us know what does some of this mean to you. And if you all could just raise your hand before you start, and then we can call on folks.
Kate, you're on mute.
Thanks. I see at least one question in the chat. Will you be looking at the benefits of mixed use projects that place residential next to employment? Absolutely. One of the things that we're really going to try to do through this whole process is make sure we're always syncing up our analysis against kind of transportation, housing, and jobs. How do those things come together, and where are there opportunities perhaps to do more mixed use districts? Because we all know when we do that, we're kind of taking a little bit of the impact off of the transportation system, because when we put people and jobs closer together, it makes transit, walking, and biking more viable and shorter vehicular trips. So we will be looking at that for sure. I see a hand raised by Catherine Cole.
Yep.
Hi, yes, I just had a question with respect to the actual target employers, and I was surprised about the limitations on healthcare. Obviously, one of the largest employers in the county is Baycare, and that ranges everything from their hospitals to their back office. And one of the greatest employment needs in the county is to serve that employer, which is nurses. And so you have an entire educational system, both the private and public educators, who are turning on a dime to identify opportunities to train more nursing. And I would think that the salaries that are offered, I can appreciate that it's a service industry, but seeing the job postings coming out of the hospitals and medical offices and the salaries that are being paid, it just surprises me that wouldn't be considered a positive employment opportunity in our community. There's also so much upward mobility for that. So I just was surprised at that.
Yeah, Caitlin or Jeff, do you guys want to kind of restate again, I think the big picture is all jobs are good jobs per se, but the focus on the traded clusters, and again, if we could just talk a little bit about that, but also how we will look broadly at all the jobs in the county.
Yeah, of course, happy to touch on this. To kind of get into the technical, nerdy data side of things a little bit, we do utilize Harvard definitions for clusters and follow along with kind of the national approach to thinking about economic clusters. So the difference here, I think, or the big distinction is the export-oriented dynamic of the target industries rather than the local serving. And as Kate mentioned, all jobs are good jobs, high paying jobs are better jobs. And we are certainly interested in retaining and having space for all of those, but this START study in particular is focused on attracting those export oriented jobs. And I guess the other thing to say there is that as Jeff had recalled, with kind of Mayo Clinic being the preeminent example of kind of what could be considered as a target industry job for healthcare, much of the growth for Bay Care and hospital systems within the county will be growing from within the county. So as the county grows, that industry grows rather than an attraction strategy to try to recruit new hospital systems or from outside of the region.
So I think there's another question. Commissioner Mertz?
Yes, hi. Can you hear me this time?
Yes.
I switched to a hotspot on my cell phone, so that seems to be okay. Thank you, and sorry again for the interruptions before. One thing that I just wanted to ask is the original target employment industrial land study, it listed I think 11 target industry clusters in Pinellas County. And whereas I see some of them in the listing that we were evaluating A through D or E, there were a couple of them that were listed in here I didn't see in there, and specifically marine science and research and development, and there were a couple of others. Is there a particular reason that those were left out? Because I think that those areas, especially Pinellas County being a, surrounded by water and a marine oriented type of county, there's a very strong marine science program in Pinellas County in the St. Petersburg area. And I think that the ability for those should be included unless there was a particular reason. The items were aviation, aerospace, financial services, high-tech industries, information technology, marine science, medical technology, microelectronics, modeling simulation, optics and phonetics, research and development, and wireless technology. Now, a number of those were included, as I said, but there were some that weren't. And I think it would be worthwhile to go back and review that 11 listing. And obviously things move and some things might no longer be important, but some of the other issues I think are as important as they were then, if not more. So just an observation, and I appreciate that.
Thank you for that. It's our understanding also that over time, the target industries list is continually being redefined. So our list we've been working in close contact with the folks over at Pinellas County Economic Development to understand what the most recent list that they're using is and looking at what additional industries would fall under that. And I will just to also add, the target industries that we have kind of listed are not the only industries or sectors that should be part of an attraction strategy. These are kind of the ones that bubble up to the top to kind of prioritize and emphasize for your attraction strategies. So if there are other sectors that provide high wages that have related kind of knowledge like marine biology and marine tech, then those can also be included. And we are happy to take a look at the list and make sure that the right ones are included. In the full report, we have a list of additional sectors. We'll take a look at that to make sure everything's being accounted for.
Well, I appreciate that because I know right now on the governor's desk potentially is $70 million for a new building at USF down in Pinellas County for environmental and oceanographic, a big center there to tie into a number of items which are in the St. Petersburg and the entire Pinellas County region. So marine science and research and development, I think, will have an impact. And this is a pretty important study. I wouldn't want that to be an addendum at a later date, especially since it's already been recognized as early as 2008. So thank you.
I think we have time
Gary,
for one more question from Gary, or comment from Gary, and then we'll be at our 5-minute mark.
The thing I think, jumps out at me is almost the disconnect almost between what everything's supposed to be in the study. I mean, it's targeted employment, and we indicated right off the bat that the targeted employment, all of the primary categories, the biggest employers, none of them needed industrial land. The overwhelming majority didn't need industrial land. So this has been one of the battles in Joe's Creek, is there been this desire to protect manufacturing jobs when there's only maybe me and 2 other people that are manufacturers, and the rest of everybody else there is really warehouse. So there's been an aversion to converting Joe's Creek, for instance, into mixed use, which is exactly the best place in the county to make it mixed use, because real industrial land is like what you have up in Gateway, where you have 480 volt power and you have dock high stuff and the trucks can turn around and you don't have stormwater issues and whatnot. So I think that's something we should, realize, that this is telling us right off the bat that we shouldn't be so paranoid about protecting industrial land, because the primary jobs, all of them could be in office buildings.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. It's definitely, as you heard from the beginning, the reason this study is happening is because things have started to change, and we're trying to understand which jobs are going to make the most impact, and then what are those space needs, and really revisit all the policies accordingly. So good points. One more quick question, but I know we're about out of time. Mr. Pergolesi, if I got that right? Oh, you're on mute.
There we
There
go.
you go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Agree 100% with what Gary just said. So I asked the question in the beginning, would you be looking at the current usage of the industrial lands? I think a lot of the industrial lands we have in this county have a floor area ratio probably less than 25%. And if we can be redeveloping that industrial land to much higher FAR, I mean, I think the plan allows 0.65. We never get anywhere near that. You can see that the land could be used much more efficiently, which would then maybe open up some of the industrial land to affordable housing and particularly mixed use projects. I think the legislation refers to mixed use projects as well, SB 962. And I think that's what we're going to be seeing more of here in Pinellas County.
Yep. Okay, well, I think we need to move on to our final kind of closing slides here, but thank you all for the feedback. Just to kind of say, show where we are. We're in the middle of the analysis. Again, you guys have brought up some good points that we'll make sure we kind of go back and make sure our analytical approach is touching on the very issues that you've raised. We'll be coming back to you to talk then about our findings, and then start to have a dialogue about, well, what are some of the changes that are needed based on what we're seeing in terms of both the targeted industries and the targeted job growth, the land available, and kind of those location and square footage needs and form of buildings. So we'll come back to you soon with that. And then our kind of final report will come up with a set of recommendations in terms of how does the county continue to position for and continue to both attract and retain the jobs that everybody wants. If you go to the next slide, we've got 3 key meetings, and the next one will be on June 29th. from 1 to 2:30 p.m. We will be in person at the Epicenter in Clearwater. And then we'll come back to you again on August 9th and then September 21st. So between now and our next meeting, we're going to be doing a lot more digging into the data and understanding some of the issues that you all have raised. So it'll be a hefty meeting next time, and we're excited to be able to do that in person. If we go to the next slide, I think that might be it. Again, if you guys have any final comments or thoughts that you didn't get to share today and want to make sure we as our study team knows, please go ahead and email Jared as the primary point of contact, and he'll be sure to get that information back to us. With that, Jared, any final remarks or?
Just wanted to say thank you all to everyone who showed up today. Again, today was primarily just a meet and greet overview of the project, those meetings that were on the previous slide, and we'll be sure to send out this presentation to everyone. Those are going to be really critical for us in terms of getting your feedback on those key findings that we're coming up with. So we really look forward to those future meetings with you all. And again, just thank you so much for being here today with us.
And in case you guys didn't see, there are a couple links in the chat. So there's one to forwardpinellas.org/TEILS. And so that's the general project website to stay up to date. And then there's also the link to the business survey. So if you guys want to take that. That's it.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.